He stared at her, stunned. "You're really doing this to your own son?" Maria didn't blink. "No, Kyle. I'm doing this because I'm your mother." She handed him the invoice. 18 years of unpaid sacrifice. By morning, his accounts were frozen. And the house he mocked her in? Legally, hers again. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." He laughed and said I was just the babysitter. Funny, I don't remember nannies selling their wedding rings. The laughter around the dinner table was warm, loud, unfiltered, until it wasn't. Maria blinked twice, smile frozen on her face, as Kyle lifted his champagne glass and said, "Let's not forget the real MVP of our family, the world's most dedicated babysitter." His voice rang with sarcasm disguised as affection. 18 years of snacks, stories, and school pickups. "Cheers, Mom." A few guests chuckled politely, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. The room went quiet for a beat too long. Maria pressed the stem of her glass between her fingers, knuckles whitening. She gave a polite nod. Her heart, however, cracked in a place that had once healed over too quickly. "Babysitter?" She looked at Kyle, her only child, the one she'd stayed up with during croup attacks, whose kindergarten project she'd stayed up all night assembling, the boy she'd raised alone after burying his father at 32, the same Kyle she once held during thunderstorms and promised, "I'll never leave you." Now here he was, 33, grinning smugly at a table full of colleagues and new in-laws, acting as if she were just the help. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Not yet. Later that evening, while they cleared dessert plates and wine glasses, Maria moved quietly through the kitchen. She caught Kyle's voice in the hallway, low and careless. "She's lucky, honestly. Most people would kill for free childcare." Another voice, probably his wife's, chimed in with a chuckle. "I mean, yeah, she's got nothing else going on. She needs us." Maria didn't flinch this time. Her hands moved rhythmically over the dishes. Rinse, scrub, dry. But her ears were sharp, cataloging each word like ledger entries. That night, long after the house had gone still, and Kyle and his wife were curled up in their over-decorated master bedroom, Maria sat cross-legged on the floor of her modest guest room. She reached under her bed and pulled out a weathered cardboard box labeled in faded ink. Kyle, ages 1 to 18. Inside were old vaccination cards, receipts from school fundraisers, letters from teachers, photo booth strips, a crayon drawing of a stick figure woman holding hands with a boy beneath the words, "My mom is a superhero." Maria's fingers trembled as she sifted through the memories. One envelope, thick with folded documents, bore the markings of her old bank, withdrawal records from the year she sold her wedding ring. She had pawned it for Kyle's SAT prep classes and his senior trip to D.C. He never knew. She leaned back against the bed, eyes hot, but no tears fell. Instead, she reached for her reading glasses, set the box aside, and opened a clean yellow legal pad. Across the top, in neat, even script, she wrote, "Invoice for 18 years" beneath it, a subtitle, "Because babysitters get paid, mothers give everything." Line by line, she began writing, "Rent support during college, 4 years X $850 per month. Food, clothing, school supplies, estimated $200 per month, times 18 years. Pediatrician co-pays, after-school tutoring, car down payment, $2,008. First business loan, $10,000, unpaid." As the list grew, so did her resolve. She'd always been told mothers weren't supposed to count, but suddenly counting felt like clarity. It felt like reclaiming something that had been quietly erased. Outside, the wind pushed through the trees, and somewhere a branch scratched against the side of the house like a warning. Maria set her pen down only to retrieve an old manila folder from her closet, one she hadn't opened in years. She slid the invoice draft inside, along with copies of documentation she had long since saved, just in case. On the cover, she wrote in bold black marker, Phase 1. She stared at it for a long moment, before reaching for her phone. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed the message. "Let's begin what we discussed, quietly." She hit send. To her estate lawyer. The yellow legal pad still sat open on the desk. Maria flipped the page and started a second list, this one with no numbers, just memories, losses, milestones. In the header, she wrote, "Emotional labor, irreplaceable, but still billable. Every dollar I gave, every sleep I lost, now has a price." Maria sat at her small kitchen table, a steaming cup of tea in her hands, untouched and cooling fast. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, echoing through the quiet house like judgment. Before her lay the yellow legal pad from the night before, its first page dense with scribble, figures, the beginnings of a calculation that felt more like a reckoning. She exhaled slowly, then clicked open her laptop. The soft hum of it coming to life felt strangely ceremonial, like the start of something irreversible. This wasn't just a spreadsheet, it was a resurrection of memory. She named the file, Ledger of Sacrifices.xlsx. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure where to start. Rent support, 2009 to 2013, she typed, then paused to calculate. She pulled a dusty banker's box from the hallway closet, labeled Kyle College Years, and opened it. Inside, old receipts, handwritten notes, and bank slips spilled out like ghosts of her former life. Her eyes landed on a faded carbon copy of a check from 2010, $650 for Kyle's dorm deposit. She remembered that one vividly, not because of the number but because of how she got the money. Flashback. It was raining that afternoon. The pawn shop smelled of metal and mildew. Maria had wrapped her wedding ring in a napkin, the one with tiny embroidered flowers that her husband once tucked into her lunchbox on their anniversary. "I'll be back for it," she'd whispered to the man behind the counter. He didn't respond. She never returned. That ring, her last tangible tie to her husband, had paid for Kyle's SAT prep course and the coat he wore in his college yearbook photo. Kyle had no idea. He'd called that coat cheap. Back in the present, Maria typed it in, SAT prep plus winter coat minus $1,200. She added a note, paid with pawned ring. As the hours passed, the numbers grew. Food and groceries, 1991 to 2009, $300 per month average, x 216 months, $64,800. Private school tuition, $9,200 per year, x 4 equals $36,800. Doctor visits, braces, prescriptions, estimated $11,300. Car down payment for Kyle's graduation, $4,500 emergency dental surgery when he lost his insurance, $2,300. Her throat tightened as she wrote it all out, not because of the money, but because of the silence that followed each of those sacrifices. Kyle had never once asked how she managed. He assumed she always had just enough. By mid-afternoon, the spreadsheet was taking shape, painful, precise, damning. But she wasn't finished. She picked up the phone and called Leo. "Maria?" The voice on the other end was warm and gravelly. "Been a while." "Leo?" she said quietly. "I need a favor." A big one. Leo Carter was a retired accountant. He and his late wife had been Maria's neighbors for decades. He had a gentle demeanor and a memory like a steel trap, especially when it came to numbers. "I'm building something," Maria said, lowering her voice like it was a confession. "A document, a record, and I want it to hold up in court if it ever comes to that." "Say no more," Leo replied. "Send me what you've got." By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria's fingers ached, her back stiff from hours hunched over her laptop. But her eyes were sharp, focused, alive. She reviewed the latest total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Leo had made a few tweaks, recalculated some old compounding costs, and added adjusted inflation on the tuition fees. $412,580.41. She stared at the number until it blurred. She remembered the first time Kyle had handed her a macaroni necklace and said, "This is for all you do." He was 6. She remembered the last time he handed her something, a takeout receipt with, "Can you cover this?" scribbled in pen. He was 32. She had given her life in pieces, quietly, repeatedly, without ever asking to be counted. Now, finally, she was. Maria scrolled down and added one more line. Emotional labor, 18 years times 365 days equals incalculable. She hit save and sat back. Then, with steady hands, she opened her email and wrote one sentence to Leo. Next, we categorize by legal relevance. They said I was being dramatic, but they'd never read the fine print of my love. It started with a question over breakfast, innocent on the surface, but sharp beneath the crust. Maria stirred her oatmeal with the back of her spoon, watching the steam rise like fog over a battlefield. Across the table, Kyle scrolled through his phone, barely glancing up. I was looking at some old files, Maria said casually. Tuition, textbooks, braces, rent. You remember when I paid the deposit for your first apartment? Kyle gave a short, dismissive laugh, not even bothering to look away from the screen. Mom, you sound like you're sending me a bill. That was 20 years ago. Maybe I should, she said softly, watching him. He grinned like it was a joke. I mean, she added, just a rough tally. With interest, maybe, just for fun. Kyle finally looked up, brow furrowing slightly. You're not serious, right? Maria only smiled. You know I always kept receipts. He rolled his eyes and returned to his phone, muttering something under his breath. Maria didn't press the point. Not then. Later that day, she found herself in the attic. The dust made her eyes itch, but she didn't stop sorting through the faded boxes and mismatched file folders. She moved methodically, like she was assembling a puzzle whose image had once been clear but was now blurred by time and betrayal. Inside one box, she found a photo of Kyle in his elementary school uniform, arms flung around her legs, his smile missing 2 front teeth. Folded behind it was a receipt from the private school's enrollment office, dated August 1998, tuition $3,800. In another box, $78.90 for SAT prep flashcards, $312 for a winter jacket when he outgrew his only one, $950 for wisdom teeth extraction after insurance lapsed. Maria sat cross-legged on the wooden floor, pages fanned around her like petals. She was surrounded by the story of her own quiet love, written in receipts, signed in sacrifice. That evening, as they sat together watching TV, Maria cleared her throat and tried again. Kyle, she said gently, would you ever consider reimbursing me for some of those early expenses? I mean, I know I didn't keep perfect records, but he turned his head, blinked at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language, and burst into a laugh. Mom, come on, that's crazy. You're obsessing over the past again. Across the room, Kyle's wife, Tanya, chimed in without looking up from her laptop. Maria, you really should let that stuff go. You always act like you were the only parent in the world. Maria smiled tightly. I was the only one Kyle had, if you recall. Tanya's lips thinned. Still, it's weird. It's like you want to charge rent on love. Maria stood up slowly, brushing invisible lint off her lap. No, she said. I just want to know if love ever gets audited. She retreated to her room, heart pounding, not from sadness anymore, but from a kind of cold, settled fire. This wasn't about reimbursement. This was about recognition. She had handed her life over piece by piece to a boy who grew into a man who now called her dramatic. Maria sat at her desk and opened the folder again. This time she clipped the most critical receipts together and began labeling them. Food, shelter, healthcare, education, emotional labor, though she wasn't yet sure how to price that one. She was still working through a pile of medical bills from Kyle's teenage years when her phone buzzed. Unknown number, old area code. She frowned and answered. Mrs. Alvarez? The voice was deep and professional. This is Charles Miller. I'm calling from Henson and Wells, the HR branch of your late husband's employer. Maria sat up straighter. Yes? We've been reviewing pension claims and found a survivor benefit attached to your file, something that was never properly distributed after your husband's death. Maria blinked. What? If you're available to verify some information, I believe there may be a significant deposit pending. As the call ended, Maria stared at the phone screen, frozen. She looked over at the invoice, still unfinished, and whispered, "They thought I was obsessed with the past, but the past just paid interest. They left me out of the conversation, but someone remembered me." The check didn't arrive in an envelope. It came as a direct deposit, sterile and emotionless, just a number blinking back at her from the banking app. But when Maria saw it, her hand trembled. $94,317.24. The decimals didn't dull the shock. It was surreal, standing alone in her kitchen, toaster humming behind her, while her dead husband's promise came to life through a forgotten pension. She stared at the phone screen longer than necessary, long after the numbers had been double-checked. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She simply whispered into the silence, "You remembered me, didn't you, Gabriel?" Outside, morning light filtered through the kitchen blinds, slicing the countertop into stripes of gold and shadow. It looked like prison bars. Only this time, she held the keys. 2 hours earlier, she had taken a second call from Charles Miller, the same man who'd contacted her the night before. He'd explained everything, calm, courteous, matter of fact. Her husband had worked for a logistics firm for nearly 20 years. When he died, the policy had shifted to a forgotten folder in a back-office filing cabinet. "Your name was on the original beneficiary form," Charles said. "No one updated it. Frankly, I'm glad we found it." Maria could barely speak. "It's been over 2 decades. "Yes, ma'am. There's interest accrued as well. We're sending it in one lump sum." And just like that, a man who had been gone since Kyle was in middle school was still taking care of her. Maria didn't tell Kyle. She didn't tell anyone. Instead, she did what she had always done. She moved quietly, carefully, with purpose. The first thing she did was open a new account, an online savings account with no joint holders, no paper trail linking it to the household bills. The second thing she did was close the old safety deposit box at the bank she shared with Kyle, the one she now realized he had access to. Her footsteps echoed through the cool marble floors of the bank lobby as she signed the closure forms. No one asked why. No one cared. But for the first time in years, she felt untraceable. That night, Maria sat on the edge of her bed and opened the cedar memory box she hadn't touched in years. Inside, a faded photo of her and Gabriel, arms around each other, his smile wide and familiar. The wristwatch he'd worn every day for 15 years. The letter he wrote before his final surgery, folded and stained with time. She unfolded the letter carefully. "Maria, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it. But know this, you were never just the glue. You were the foundation. I made the money, but you made the life. I know Kyle is young, and you'll raise him the right way. But don't ever let anyone treat you like you didn't build everything they're standing on. You're not invisible, and you'll never be forgotten." Maria pressed the paper to her chest and breathed. She had forgotten how much she needed to hear those words, even from the past. 2 days later, while Kyle and Tanya argued loudly over a malfunctioning dishwasher, Maria stood in the hallway, listening, her face calm, her hands tucked into her sweater pockets. "She won't lift a finger around here anymore," Tanya snapped. "She's been acting so different, moody, distant. She's old, Kyle. Maybe she's losing it." Maria turned and walked back to her room, stone-faced. Not losing it, finding it. She sat down at her desk, opened a new notebook, and wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page: "Estate planning meeting." Then, with calm fingers, she picked up her phone and dialed the number Charles had given her for their in-house legal advisor. "Hi," she said. "I'd like to set up a private meeting. I want to talk about revising my beneficiaries, and I'd like it notarized." As she hung up, Maria glanced at the calendar and circled Friday in red ink, the day her legacy would stop being a rumor and become a record. "He said I was just a babysitter, so I signed the paper that said otherwise." Maria's pen hovered above the line. The black ink shimmered faintly in the afternoon light, cast through the estate attorney's office window. A simple signature, so elegant, so final, stood between her silence and the reckoning she had postponed for far too long. She glanced at the name printed on the document before her, Kyle Sanchez, and below it the bold clause she had requested be added, beneficiary status revoked in full, effective immediately. With one breathless movement, Maria signed her name with purpose. The sound of the ballpoint scratching against paper felt louder than thunder in her chest. The attorney across from her, a soft-spoken woman named Denise with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, looked up with quiet approval. "That makes it official," she said, flipping to the next page. "Now, let's talk about your granddaughter." Maria nodded, hands folded over her lap. "I want everything to go to her, but with one condition." Denise raised a brow. "She doesn't get a penny unless she graduates college, not a penny until she's built her own spine." The room smelled faintly of aged mahogany and lavender polish. A framed diploma hung crooked behind Denise's desk, and the ticking of a wall clock grew louder with each passing second. Maria wasn't just changing paperwork, she was rewriting her own narrative, line by line. After years of being the helper, the nanny, the background fixture at birthdays and barbecues, Maria's name would now sit atop documents that mattered, and that was just the beginning. Later that evening, Maria pulled a dusty accordion folder from the back of her closet. The rubber band around it snapped with a dry pop. She laid its contents across her bed like puzzle pieces, old mortgage statements, notary copies, cosign agreements. One page caught her eye, yellowed at the corners but sharp in its significance. A document titled, Joint Purchase Agreement, Property at 117 Crestline Drive, Kyle's house. Maria sat down, heart thudding. The agreement bore 2 signatures, one hers, one his. She had co-signed when he couldn't qualify a loan. He had told her it was temporary, that her name was just to get the loan approved. He had promised to refinance. He never did. He had forgotten, but the paperwork hadn't. The next day, she returned to Denise's office carrying the folder in a canvas bag. "You're saying you still legally own part of their home?" Denise asked, reviewing the document. 40% technically, Maria replied. "More than enough to file a lien if I wanted to." Denise looked up, her eyes sharp. "Do you want to?" Maria didn't blink. "Yes." Denise didn't ask why. She simply nodded and began drafting the lien paperwork. Maria's signature appeared again, clean and deliberate, across another line of legal consequence. This time, it wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, visibility, dignity. That night, as Kyle and his wife sat watching a reality show in the living room, Maria stood by, the hallway mirror adjusting her earrings. For once, her reflection didn't look tired. It looked composed, clean, ready. Her phone buzzed. New email, line filed, 117 Crestline Drive. Status, active. She smiled. She passed Kyle on the way to the door. "You're going out again?" he asked, distracted. "I am," she said, slipping on her coat. He barely looked up. "Don't forget to lock up." Maria paused. "Don't worry," she said. "Everything's secure now." The world outside was cool, tinged with that golden hour haze that made everything look a little too beautiful for how ruthless it could be. Maria stepped into the evening like it belonged to her, and for the first time in years it did. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to demand. All she needed was a few lines of ink and the facts her son had foolishly ignored. She climbed into her car and drove toward the notary office Denise had referred her to for her next appointment. Another signature waited. As Maria pulled into the parking lot, her phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail from Kyle. His voice was clipped, nervous. "Mom? I just got a letter about some legal thing. About the house? What the hell is this?" Maria didn't press play again. She just smiled and whispered, "It's called equity, Kyle. And I'm finally taking mine back. They used to leave me leftovers. Now I leave receipts." The clink of silver against porcelain was the only sound in the house that morning. Maria sat alone at the dining table, a plate of eggs, still warm, set before her on crisp linen. The scent of toasted sourdough and freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and for once, it wasn't for anyone else. No waiting for the others to eat first, no cold leftovers scraped off the pan. This morning, she had cooked only for herself. The hallway behind her creaked. Kyle's heavy footsteps emerging from the bedroom. "Did you make breakfast?" he asked, sleep still in his voice. Maria didn't look up. She sliced into the yolk, watching the golden center bloom like a sun across her plate. "I did," she said calmly. Kyle shuffled closer, expecting a second plate or at the very least a spare mug. "For everyone?" he added. Maria raised her eyes, unhurried. "No," she said. "Just me." His brows furrowed. "Is everything okay with you lately?" She took another bite. "For the first time in a while," she said, chewing slowly. "Yes." Over the next week, subtle changes crept in like morning fog. Maria no longer cleared the dinner table after meals she hadn't been invited to. She didn't fold Kyle's shirts that were tossed into the laundry basket. She left the dishes if they weren't hers. And when Kyle's daughter asked if Grandma could pick her up from dance practice, Maria smiled and said gently, "I'm not available today, sweetheart." At first, Kyle dismissed it all as a phase, but then he came home one evening to find the kitchen spotless, but only on Maria's half. Her side of the refrigerator, once filled with family-sized casseroles and kid snacks, now housed a few glass containers labeled with dates, each containing exactly one portion, her meals, her choices. She had started dressing differently too, bright, confident colors instead of the muted cardigans she wore for blending in. Her makeup was subtle but polished. Her jewelry, once boxed away, now shimmered at her wrists and ears. "Where are you going?" Kyle asked one afternoon as she walked toward the front door wearing red lipstick and a silk scarf. "To see someone who values my time," Maria said, breezing past. He blinked. "You don't need to be cryptic, Mom." Maria turned back to him, voice even. "I'm not being cryptic. I'm just not being convenient anymore." That night, Kyle ranted to his wife. "She's acting like some diva. I asked her to help with dinner and she just said, 'I have plans.' What is that supposed to mean?" His wife muttered something about late-in-life rebellion, but her tone held a sliver of fear. Maria was changing, and they couldn't stop her. Worse, they were realizing how much they had relied on her without ever offering more than transactional affection. The next morning, Kyle tried again. Maria was reading at the breakfast table, a fresh croissant on her plate. "You're seriously not helping around here anymore?" he asked, his tone sharp. She folded her book closed and set it down with grace. "I helped for decades, Kyle," she said. "I gave and gave and gave, without a single thank you that felt real. So no, I'm not helping anymore. I'm adjusting." He scoffed. "You're being selfish." She tilted her head and smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that didn't need to argue. "I've never been clearer," she said. The next day, Kyle came home to find a small stack of unopened mail on the counter. Most were bills, but one stood out, a thick envelope, cream-colored, with a formal blue stamp in the corner. His name was typed on the label, but the sender made his stomach drop. Law Office of Denise Aranda. SKRE. Notification of personal leg. Al action. He ripped it open with trembling fingers, heart thudding in his chest. Inside was a cover letter, legal phrasing he didn't quite understand, but the first line was in bold. "This is to confirm receipt of the lien placed on property located at 117 Crestline Drive by Ms. Maria Sanchez, co-owner and client of this office." He stared at the page, blinking hard. Co-owner? His mouth went dry. "What the hell is this?" From the hallway, Maria's door clicked shut behind her. Kyle paced the kitchen, rereading the document over and over. In the silence, his wife's voice cut in from the living room. "Babe, there's another envelope. It's addressed to both of us. Since I'm just the babysitter, here's my rate. 18 years, no days off." The manila envelope was thick, sealed tightly, and sat upright on the hallway console like a grenade waiting for a fuse. Maria had left it there on purpose. A stage. A setup. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Save for the faint hum of the dishwasher and the ticking of the old kitchen clock, one of the few things in the house still running on her schedule. She heard the front door open, Kyle's footsteps heavy and oblivious, the way they always were when he came home from work. She didn't move from her seat in the living room where she sat calmly reading under the soft glow of a brass floor lamp. "Mom?" Kyle's voice echoed. A pause. Then, "What is this?" The envelope had found its hands. She turned a page. "An invoice," she said without looking up, "for services rendered." A moment of silence, then the rustle of paper being ripped open too fast. More silence, followed by a short, stunned scoff. "You've got to be kidding me." Maria finally looked at him. Number I itemized it. Kyle's face contorted as he flipped through the pages. The first sheet was a formal cover letter. The next, a meticulous spreadsheet with columns labeled food, housing, medical, emotional labor, education, transportation, emergency support, late-night care, missed work hours. Each cell filled. Each year accounted for. 18 years. 0 paid days off. At the bottom of the last page, total outstanding balance, $478,105.82. "You actually want me to, what? Pay you? For being a parent?" he snapped, waving the papers like they were trash. Maria met his outrage with a quiet steadiness. "No," she said. "I want you to acknowledge I was one." His voice rose. "This is insane. Who does this? You're just, my mom." She stood up slowly, her phone already recording from the moment he raised his voice. "I was your mother, your nurse, your chauffeur, your cook, your tutor, your emotional landfill, and yes, your babysitter, apparently." She took a calm step forward. "If that's all I ever was to you, then this is my rate." Kyle's eyes darted to her phone. "Are you recording me?" She nodded. "You bet I am." He charged forward, eyes wild. "Turn it off!" Maria held her ground. "If you touch me or the phone, it becomes a legal matter." Kyle froze in place, chest heaving. His lips twisted as if searching for a threat that could match her resolve, but he found none. There was nothing left he could take from her, because this wasn't revenge, it was collection. "I spent decades giving everything I had while you acted like it was a birthright," Maria continued. "You think this is about money? This is about memory, yours and what it conveniently left out." Kyle stared at her, caught between disbelief and shame, but he said nothing, just turned, stormed down the hallway, and slammed the bedroom door so hard that the picture frames rattled on the wall. Maria calmly ended the recording and sent the video to her attorney with the subject line, "Documentation, verbal escalation, number 1. Then she poured herself a glass of water and sat back down, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from the kind of power she hadn't felt in years. Later that evening, a courier arrived. He knocked, handed over a formal envelope, and left. Maria opened it at the table under the same lamp where she'd started the day. The words at the top read, "Subpoena, Family Mediation. Hearing in RE Financial Dispute and Domestic Agreement Inquiry, filed Kyle J. Martinez versus Maria L. Martinez." She didn't flinch. Instead, she pulled out a fresh folder and labeled it in neat black ink, "Mediation Prep, Babysitter Bill, Round 2. As Maria filed the subpoena beside her spreadsheet, her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. One line, "You're trending. Reddit found your invoice. They said I was crazy, but the judge called me credible." The courtroom smelled like old paper and tension, the kind of tension that clings to your skin, sharp as iron filings, and settles in your lungs like dust. Maria sat alone at the plaintiff's table, a navy blue blazer draped clean over her shoulders, hair pinned tightly back. Her glasses caught the overhead lights as she adjusted a stack of papers before her. Beside her sat her lawyer, a quiet but razor-sharp woman named D. Judith, who looked more like a librarian than a litigator, until she opened her mouth. Across from them, Kyle and his wife whispered frantically. Maria didn't bother trying to make out the words. She didn't need to. Their eyes said it all. Dismissal, disbelief, and the unmistakable panic of realizing you were no longer in control. "All rise," the bailiff called. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper gaze. Her gavel tapped once, and the room settled into uncomfortable stillness. "Ms. Martinez," the judge began, scanning the file in front of her. "You're seeking financial restitution for unpaid care and support, correct?" Maria rose. "Yes, Your Honor." "Your son contends that no such verbal or written agreement existed, and that what you did was, quote, just what mothers do." Maria's lips curled. Not in anger, just a smile that had waited far too long. "With respect, Your Honor," she said, "I'm here to prove what mothers actually do, and what it costs when no one values it." Judith passed the first binder forward, thick, color-coded, tabs labeled by year. The judge opened it, eyebrows rising. "This is remarkably detailed. Inside, food logs, rent contributions, tuition receipts, utility bills, handwritten notes from teachers, letters from pediatricians, school enrollment forms, everything. Even photos of Maria's wedding ring next to a cash receipt from a pawn shop dated 3 months before Kyle's SAT prep began. "I kept records," Maria said quietly. "Not to use them, just to remember what it took." Kyle scoffed. "This is a circus. She's just mad because I don't coddle her anymore." The judge turned slowly. "Mr. Martinez, I suggest you let counsel speak for you moving forward." His attorney, clearly flustered, scrambled to present a weak defense. "Your Honor, this is an emotional attack disguised as litigation. There was no explicit contract. This was familial support, not a financial transaction." Judith stood, calm and sure. "No written contract, Your Honor, but there is precedent for compensatory claims involving long-term care and co-signed property obligations, especially when one party suffers economic exploitation or misrepresentation." Maria remained silent. She didn't need to perform outrage. She'd brought receipts. The judge flipped another tab. "And this spreadsheet that went viral? This is yours?" Maria's spine straightened. "Yes, I didn't post it, but someone on Reddit did after I sent a copy to a support forum. It's titled, 'Invoice for Motherhood.'" Laughter trickled through the gallery. The judge didn't smile, but she didn't frown either. "Well," she said, closing the file, "we certainly live in new times, and sometimes new times require new accountability." Kyle's wife whispered something again. Maria saw the judge's eyes flicker toward them, disapproval creeping into her gaze like a slow tide. The court recessed briefly. When they returned, the judge leaned forward. "My recommendation is a private settlement to avoid further litigation. However, due to the financial documentation provided and the evidence of disproportionate burden and co-signed assets, I am authorizing a temporary freeze on Mr. Martinez's primary bank account pending mediation review." Kyle exploded. "You can't do that." But he could see it in the judge's eyes. She already had. Maria didn't look at him. She just opened her purse, removed a mint, and offered one to Judith. "For the nerves," she said, smiling softly. As Kyle turned red, his phone buzzed with notifications. Hundreds. He glanced down and paled. Maria's spreadsheet had hit the front page of Reddit. Thread title, "She raised him alone." He called her the babysitter. She sent him the bill. "Now when they call, I don't pick up. I charge." The ringtone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Kyle's name glowed on the screen for the 4th time that day. Maria didn't flinch. She stood over the stove stirring a pot of creamy butternut squash soup, the scent of roasted garlic and nutmeg drifting warmly through her quiet, peaceful kitchen. The phone buzzed again. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, then pressed decline. Outside, wind swept orange leaves across her porch. Inside, her silence was no longer invisible, it was chosen. 2 weeks had passed since the court hearing, since the spreadsheet, since the bank freeze. Since her son, her grown, smug, sharp-tongued son, had learned that the woman he'd once called just the babysitter had sharper teeth than he realized. She had returned home from court not just with dignity, but with momentum. It started with a flyer at her community center, seeking retired educators and patient seniors for after-school mentoring. Maria, once a public school reading specialist before her husband's accident, had nearly walked past it, but something in her paused. That evening, she emailed the contact. By the weekend, she was matched with a 3rd-grade girl struggling with comprehension, and 2 other seniors who would quickly become friends. Dolores and Janine were both widowed, witty, and outspoken. Over coffee one afternoon, Janine leaned in and said, "You know, Maria, the problem isn't that they rely on us, it's that they think we owe it to them." Maria smiled and stirred her tea. "That changes today. The calls from Kyle started almost immediately after. At first, they were curt and expectant. "Mom, we need you tomorrow night. Emergency board dinner." Then more frantic. "Can you just pick up Maya from daycare? Madison's stuck in meetings and I've got a pitch." She didn't answer. She didn't even listen to the voicemails anymore. She had a new calendar now, color-coded by tutoring appointments, volunteer work, and coffee with friends. There were no longer entries titled Babysit Maya, or Prep Dinner, or Pick Up Groceries for Kyle. Her days were full, but not crowded. Peaceful, but purposeful. Still, one morning, curiosity got the better of her. She opened her inbox and found 10 missed calls and 4 new emails. One subject line stood out, "From Madison. Please read." She opened it. Subject: "I'm sorry. Maria, I know things have been hard lately. I miss having your help. We all do. I've been under a lot of pressure, and I didn't mean half the things I said. I know Kyle hasn't been perfect, but can't we just go back to the way things were? Maya keeps asking for you. Let's talk. Maybe you can come over for dinner?" Madison Maria read it twice. Then once more, slower. There was no mention of the court. No mention of the lies. No ownership of the phrase "lucky help" or the months of gaslighting and expectation. Just a carefully phrased guilt trip, wrapped in guilt and garnished with manipulation. She didn't respond. Instead, she picked up a manila envelope from her desk and placed it in her tote bag. Inside was a printed flyer for the tutoring collective, a list of her new students, and a hand-drawn thank you card from Maya herself, back when Maria's care had come freely and without insult. She took a deep breath. She wasn't angry anymore. She was simply done. That evening, another email pinged in, this one from Madison again, but the subject line was different this time. "Urgent. Please undo what you did to the house loan. They thought I was emotional. I was keeping records." The soft tick of the grandfather clock echoed through Maria's quiet living room as she sifted through the stack of documents spread across her coffee table. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't angry. She was surgical. On the couch beside her, Leonard, her accountant friend of 30 years, adjusted his bifocals and whistled low. "You always were a meticulous woman, Maria. I just didn't know how meticulous." Maria didn't smile. She was too focused, watching him flip through bank statements and loan documents like a forensic surgeon dissecting a wound. She handed him one more folder, marked only with a single tab. "Kyle. Red flags." Inside were years' worth of joint credit card statements. Most were ones Maria had long assumed had been canceled, but as Leonard leaned forward, tapping the top of one page with his pen, her stomach turned. "This one," he said, voice low. "This car lease? That's not yours." She already knew. She'd never driven a black Escalade in her life. Leonard continued flipping. The more pages he turned, the quieter the room became. The occasional hum of a car passing outside or the distant bark of a neighbor's dog was the only thing breaking the silence. Then he paused. "This co-signed business line," he muttered, tapping another form. "Kyle used your social security number to secure this loan. You're listed as the secondary signer." Maria's chest tightened. She reached for her teacup with a steady hand but didn't sip. "That's identity fraud," he added, his tone now clipped. "And depending on the state statutes, you might be entitled to leverage, ownership even." Maria stared at the document. Her late husband's handwriting was somewhere in these files, back when Kyle had needed a leg up for college. It wasn't just betrayal. It was entitlement dressed up as familial trust. The next morning, Maria walked into her attorney's office carrying a cardboard box with "Audit Final" scribbled in marker. Her attorney, Margaret, flipped through the findings with a slow, deliberate grace that Maria admired. "If these hold up, and they will," Margaret said, "you have every right to file identity fraud paperwork. And more importantly, you have a path into his company's shareholder records." Maria's eyes narrowed slightly. "Which means I could technically reclaim partial ownership. Or at the very least," Margaret said with a glint in her eye, "pause the next quarterly distribution until this is sorted." Maria nodded. It wasn't revenge, it was recovery. There was a difference. By the end of the day, 3 certified envelopes had been mailed out, one to the bank that issued the business loan, one to the local small business board, and one to the IRS. The 4th was waiting on Maria's desk, her official identity theft affidavit. Maria leaned back in her chair as the sun dipped low across the horizon outside her window. Orange and gold painted the edges of the sky, casting shadows across her desk. She had given this boy her name, her savings, her peace. And now, he'd tried to take her credit too. No more. The next morning, as she was preparing to head out for another tutoring session, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Maria?" The voice was unmistakably Madison's, but breathy, tight, almost rehearsed. Maria didn't respond immediately. I heard about the audit," Madison continued, her voice cracking. "I didn't know. Kyle never told me he used your social. But listen, I was wondering if we could maybe meet, in person, just the 2 of us?" Maria raised an eyebrow, slowly lowering her purse to the kitchen counter. Madison's voice softened. "Please, just coffee. I just want to talk, privately." Maria didn't answer right away. She simply glanced at the envelope of newly printed ownership disclosures still sitting on her entryway table. "Where?" she asked. There was a pause. Then, "The west parking lot behind the old library. Tomorrow at 10. Maria said nothing. She hung up without a goodbye. She looked around the room, took a breath, and walked to her file cabinet. She pulled out a blank notepad, jotted down the time, and placed it inside her purse, right beside the notarized document confirming her claim to 18% of Kyle's business equity. As she zipped her bag shut, her phone buzzed again, this time from her attorney. The message preview was just one line. "Do not meet her alone." She came with tears and a fake apology. I came with a notarized witness. The morning was overcast, a blanket of gray smothering the parking lot behind the old library. Maria pulled into her space precisely at 9:56 a.m., cutting the engine but leaving the keys in the ignition. Her breath was steady, her posture upright, her handbag neatly zipped and placed on the passenger seat. Next to her in the glove compartment, tucked between tissues and mints, was a manila envelope marked "Confidential, Trust Revision." She didn't come to talk. She came to trade. At exactly 10:01, a dark sedan pulled in 3 spots down. Madison stepped out, dressed in oversized sunglasses and a cream-colored coat too polished for the cracked asphalt beneath her heels. She walked quickly but hesitated when she saw the man leaning against the brick wall near the edge of the lot. Maria's longtime notary, Ralph, clipboard in hand. Madison's smile faltered. "You brought someone?" she asked, approaching Maria's window. "I brought a witness," Maria replied, stepping out. "You said you wanted to talk." Madison blinked fast. "Maria, listen. I didn't know Kyle used your information, and I didn't want you to feel attacked. This whole situation has just escalated so far. We're family. Can't we fix this privately?" "You mean silently," Maria said, her voice cool. "Privately means no paper trail. I'm not in that phase of life anymore." Madison looked around, lowering her voice. "Okay, look. Can you drop the audit claim? The lien? The social media mess? I'm begging you. Kyle is spiraling. He's not eating. His business is tanking, and Her voice cracked. "I don't know how much longer I can hold it all together." Maria nodded. "I'm sure it's difficult, but I came with a condition." Madison's jaw clenched. "What condition?" Maria reached into her bag and pulled out a single page. "Sign your name off the trust. Today. Right now. You remember the property title revision during the wedding? You asked me to sign it while the DJ tested speakers." A flicker of panic crossed Madison's face. "That cabin belonged to me. Always did. I was sentimental and stupid. That ends today." "You can't be serious," Madison hissed. "That place was a gift." "No," Maria said, her voice sharp and measured. "It was a pawn. And I'm done playing." She handed Madison the pen and gestured toward Ralph, who was already ready with a notary seal and ID clipboard. Madison hesitated, scanning Maria's face for any sign of weakness. She found none. "I sign this, and what? You just walk away?" Madison asked. I walk home, to my beach cabin, Maria replied, and you get your drama back under wraps. Tears welled in Madison's eyes, but Maria didn't flinch. It wasn't that she didn't feel sympathy. She simply understood now. Sympathy had been weaponized against her for years. With trembling fingers, Madison signed. Ralph notarized. Maria folded the document, tucked it neatly into her purse, and stepped back toward her car. "You're not coming after Kyle's company too, are you?" Madison asked, her voice smaller now. Maria turned, the first trace of warmth in her eyes. "I'm done chasing, but I'll always collect what's mine." She drove away calmly, the sound of tire on cracked concrete fading into the gray distance. The fog had begun to lift. Back at her home, Maria placed the signed document next to the framed photo of her late husband. Her fingers lingered on the frame, remembering his voice on the night they signed the deed to that beach cabin. "This is for you, Maria. Not the family. You." She had honored that promise, even if it had taken years to reclaim. 2 days later, Kyle stood at his mailbox, flipping through envelopes until he found one with his name in bold, legal font. He tore it open, expecting a bill. Inside was an official notice of eviction from the LLC that now owned the house. His mother's LCL. As he stood frozen on the porch, another envelope slipped from the stack, addressed to his wife. Her name had just been removed from the second trust. They thought they inherited a mansion. Turns out I loaned it. The knock came at 7:42 a.m., sharp and deliberate. Kyle opened the door, groggy-eyed in wrinkled sweats, and found a man in a blue-collared shirt holding a clipboard and a crisp white envelope. "Delivery for Mr. Kyle Thompson." Kyle took the envelope, nodding with a dazed grunt, then shut the door behind him. As he ripped it open, a strange tension began crawling up his spine. He skimmed the heading. Notice of possession. Lion enforcement filed. It was real, legally binding, final. He dropped onto the foyer bench, rereading it 3 times. According to the enforcement clause, tied to a quiet lien filed months ago, Maria had just executed full rights over the property. Her signature was dated and stamped. The LLC she formed now controlled the deed. "Madison!" he shouted into the hallway. "It's from her. My mom. The house. She's taken control of it." Madison peeked out from the kitchen, spatula in hand, mascara half applied. "Taken? What do you mean, taken?" "She didn't evict us," Kyle muttered, still staring at the page. She put us on a lease." "What?" Kyle handed her the document, number. "We're tenants now, rent due 1st of the month, at market rate." Silence fell between them as if the walls themselves had stiffened. Madison read the amount, her lips parted but no sound came. "She can't do this," she finally whispered. "She already did." Across town, Maria sipped her tea by the window of her newly restored beach cabin. Sunlight filtered in across freshly painted walls, soft blue and cream, echoing memories of the home she'd once dreamed of retiring in, with her husband before cancer had rewritten their plans. Now, with the lease income from Kyle's property, renovation had moved quickly. New floors, structural repairs, custom shutters, even the sunroom she used to doodle on napkins years ago. The house felt like breathing again. She moved through each room with intention, refurnishing not with extravagance, but with pieces that made her feel present. A carved bookshelf, an old record player, a photo of her, her husband, and a 10-year-old Kyle laughing by a camping fire. But now, laughter from that version of Kyle was buried beneath selfishness and entitlement. That night, Maria finished painting a small sign to hang over her door. Casa de Amor, built with love, not expectation. The next morning, she received an email forwarded from her lawyer. It was from one of Kyle's business investors, a firm that had once enthusiastically backed his tech venture. The email subject made Maria's pulse tick up. Investor concern. Kyle Thompson. She clicked. The body was short. Following recent viral content, our board is re-evaluating our position with Thompson Digital. This includes concerns regarding public perception, legal entanglements, and fiduciary risk. Effective immediately, we are suspending all further investment. Please notify if legal counsel will be required for disengagement. Attached was a screenshot from Reddit, the viral invoice post. Thousands of upvotes, thousands of comments. Imagine raising your son alone for 18 years and he calls you the babysitter. Then she drops a spreadsheet, a lien, and the internet burns down. She didn't ask for flowers, she asked for accountability. Queen. Maria's hand trembled only slightly as she set the phone down. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But something inside her settled, a bone click of justice aligning with peace. Across town, Kyle sat in the home office that was no longer his. His email was open too. He stared at the subject line for a long time before clicking, "Capital withdrawal notification, effective immediately." His jaw clenched, his chest rose, fell, and then, slam. He pounded the table with his fist. From the hallway, Madison's voice wavered. "Kyle? What is it now?" He didn't answer. He finally understood. His mother hadn't just reclaimed property. She'd reclaimed narrative, worth, dignity. And somehow, the world watched and applauded her doing it. Kyle turned to the window and saw a moving van outside, not for him, but unloading boxes into Maria's beach home next door. A camera crew followed behind. A documentary? A feature? He wasn't sure. But she wasn't done yet. One signature gave him life. One signature took back everything. The pen didn't tremble in her hand. Not anymore. Maria stared at the final page of the estate file spread across her oak dining table. The paper was cream-colored, the ink sharp and dark. Her signature at the bottom would finalize decades of endurance into something sacred. Legacy. She exhaled slowly. One signature gave him life, she murmured. And this one frees me. Her estate attorney, a gentle-eyed woman named Camille, nodded across the table. "Are you ready?" Maria smiled, not from happiness, but from a quiet kind of power. "Yes, let's put it in writing." Camille pushed the final sheet forward. Maria signed once, then twice more. Each signature bled years of unpaid sacrifice, invisible labor, and bruises of disrespect right off her chest. The new will was now official. Everything. From the small investments she'd built to the house Kyle once bragged about inheriting, the pension savings, the real estate shares, and even the rights to the renovated beach cabin, was now left to her 10-year-old granddaughter, Lily. With one condition: it would be held in trust, released in full only if Lily graduated college or started a nonprofit for single mothers. Maria had also added a special clause, a lump sum earmarked exclusively for a scholarship fund, targeted at first-generation college students raised by single moms. "You said you wanted it to be poetic," Camille said, sealing the folder with the firm's gold-embossed ribbon. "It is," Maria replied. "It's justice disguised as love." The following weekend, Maria hosted one final family dinner, not as a matriarch hoping for togetherness, but as a woman tying off the last string in a frayed lineage. She invited her nieces, her two closest cousins, her goddaughter, even Madison's younger sister, whom she'd always found more compassionate than Madison herself. Camille came too. "As a friend," Maria had said. She made her famous red rice, lemon garlic chicken, and cinnamon flan. The table glowed under soft lighting, silverware clinked, and for once laughter rang in the room without tension. But Kyle's chair, once at the head of the table, was empty. Intentionally, his name was never mentioned. Not once. Maria passed out linen-wrapped gifts at the end of the meal. Inside each, a handwritten note and a small engraved silver key. One cousin asked gently, "Is this for a safe?" Maria raised her glass, her voice even. "Number, it's symbolic, a reminder that you don't need to stay locked inside someone else's version of your story." Later that night, long after the dishes were cleared and the guests had gone, Maria sat in her reading chair by the fire. The folder with her estate plan rested beside her tea, the ribbons still unbroken. Her phone buzzed. A voice memo. "Kyle." She stared at the screen, debating. Then she pressed play. His voice crackled through, low and shaking. "Mom, I don't know what else to say. I was stupid. I didn't know how much you carried. I thought you'd always just be there. I don't deserve anything. But I miss you. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." There was a pause, then a quiet sob. "Please. I know I ruined things. I'm not asking for money. Just a chance to fix it." Maria stared into the flame. The audio still played faint static. She didn't cry. She didn't reply. She simply tapped "save," then tucked the phone into a drawer beside the file labeled Kyle, ages 1 to 18. In the silence that followed, Maria turned to the fireplace and added one last log. As the flames crackled, her eyes stayed fixed, not on the past, but on the empty space above the mantel. Tomorrow she would hang a new frame, a photo of her, Lily, and the beach behind them, caption etched in gold foil: "Inheritance isn't what you take, it's what you leave behind." He called it babysitting. I called it my life. Now I finally have it back. The lights dimmed in the auditorium just as Maria stepped onto the stage, the soft click of her heels muffled by the velvet flooring. A backdrop of rich plum and gold framed her silhouette as she approached the podium, gripping the edges with fingers that had once packed school lunches, wiped away fevers, and stitched hems without thanks. Now she stood not as someone's mother or someone's servant, but as the keynote speaker of the Women in Wealth Summit 2025. "Invoices," she began, her voice even and deliberate, "are not just about money. Sometimes they're about memory, and sometimes they're about finally being heard." The crowd, mostly women across generations, leaned forward. She told them the story, not every petty insult, not every tear shed in the privacy of her laundry room, but the arc of reclamation, the spreadsheet, the pension, the lien, the house. "When my son called me the babysitter, I remembered the night I sold my wedding ring to keep his college tuition check from bouncing," she said, pausing just long enough to let the silence absorb the weight of that sentence. Some women gasped, others nodded in fierce solidarity. One elderly woman quietly dabbed at her cheek. By the end of the talk, the applause was thunderous. A podcast crew from a popular network rushed her with a request. "Maria Torres," the host beamed, "you just rewrote the definition of invisible labor." Within days, her story, titled "The Invoice That Broke the Chain," became the most streamed episode of the year. Weeks later, on a crisp spring afternoon, Maria stood outside the red brick middle school where Kyle's daughter, Lily, attended. Children streamed out, backpacks bouncing, voices like bird calls. Maria clutched a padded envelope. Inside, a letter, a trust document, and a copy of her new will, clearly outlining Lily's name, and the scholarship clause created in her honor. "Grandma!" Lily ran up, cheeks flushed. Maria bent down to hug her tightly. "I brought something for you. It's not a toy, but it's for your future," she said gently, placing the envelope in her hands. "Give it to your teacher, or your mom, if I'm not around." Lily looked confused but nodded, holding the envelope like it was a sacred gift. Just as Maria turned to leave, she saw him, Kyle, leaning awkwardly against the fence, dressed in slacks and a wrinkled shirt that hung looser than it used to. He looked older, thinner, like life had started peeling him down to the bone. "Maria," he said softly. She said nothing. He took a tentative step. "I heard the podcast." Still, she didn't speak. I didn't know it would come to this," he continued, voice breaking. "I didn't know you were keeping score." She finally turned to face him, her eyes calm but cold. "I wasn't keeping score," she said. "I was keeping proof." Kyle blinked, as if slapped. He opened his mouth, searching for a response, but Maria had already turned back toward her car. Lily waved from the passenger seat, the envelope still in her lap. Maria slipped into the driver's seat without another word. That night, back home in her sunlit kitchen, Maria picked up her phone. There were 6 missed calls, 2 from Kyle, 1 voicemail from his wife. She scrolled down, exhaled through her nose, and tapped a contact menu. Delete contact, block number, confirm. Then she did one more thing. Settings, change number, confirm. The screen blinked. The line went quiet. And for the first time in her life, Maria Torres no longer owed anyone an answer. As the kettle began to boil behind her, Maria opened her new inbox. Dozens of new messages flooded in. Event requests, collaboration offers, interview invitations. But one subject line stood out. "Would you consider writing a book?" He gave me 18 years of silence. I gave him one bill, and a lifetime to think about it. The waves whispered with a patience only time could teach. Maria sat alone on the weathered wooden bench facing the Pacific, her knees wrapped in a soft woven shawl, the air kissed with salt and the faint scent of eucalyptus from nearby trees. The sun was just beginning to tip toward the horizon, painting the sea in streaks of amber and wine. In her hands, she held the final copy, crisp, precise, itemized down to the hour. The spreadsheet turned invoice, the labor turned ledger, the document that captured every sleepless night, every missed meal, every job passed up, every shirt ironed, every fever cooled, paid not in money, but in a quiet, consuming kind of love. Maria tilted her head, eyes tracking a single gull flying low over the waves. A gust of breeze lifted the edge of the paper. She pressed it down gently, her fingers grazing the red stamp she'd just added across the top, in clean, dignified font, paid in full. And yet, she wasn't going to send it. Not now, not ever, because it had never been about the repayment. Not really. It was about the acknowledgement, the restoration, the reclamation of a lifetime of service disguised as motherhood, of value buried under familiarity. She folded the invoice in thirds and tucked it back into its folder, now thick with footnotes and signatures and clippings. She laid it flat on her lap, closed her eyes, and took a breath, the kind of breath that sinks deeper than the lungs. "Grandma?" The soft voice came from her left. Maria turned, and there she was, Isabel. 12 years old, and suddenly all elbows and confidence, her curls pulled into a loose braid, her cheeks flushed from the walk. Isabel carried a small notebook, its cover hand-decorated with glitter and stickers. She plopped down beside Maria without asking, curling her legs up underneath her. "I brought it," she said, holding up the book proudly. "Wanna see?" Maria smiled. "Of course." The notebook's title was written in purple marker, bold and slightly uneven, "Things Grandma Taught Me." The first page was neatly ruled. Isabel had started a list. "Speak quietly when you're angry. It scares them more. Keep your own bank account. If they mock, your silence. It means you're winning. Love is not a debt." Maria didn't realize she was crying until she saw the ink blur under her thumb. Isabel leaned in. "I'm still adding stuff. I want to be like you when I grow up." Maria looked at her. Not just her features, which mirrored Kyle's more than she wanted to admit, but the fire behind her eyes. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't rebellion. It was clarity. She kissed Isabel on the forehead. "You'll be better." They sat in silence as the sky melted into velvet. Somewhere behind them, the sound of a distant bell signaled the end of the day, but Maria felt something else ending too, or perhaps beginning. A new voicemail notification buzzed on her phone. She didn't check it. Instead, she reached into her tote and pulled out a small tin box. She placed the final invoice inside and sealed it shut. Then she opened her own notebook and started a new page. "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you teach them to carry forward." She closed it gently. Isabel yawned and leaned her head on Maria's shoulder. The breeze slowed. The moment expanded. "I wasn't just a babysitter. I was the reason he survived, and now I'm the reason I thrive."